And there we go.
Hello, so this is Aaron with Dharma Gates, and I'm here with meditation teacher Claire Villareal, and we wanted to share a little video about both the upcoming event that we'll be doing in a few weeks with Dharma Gates, and then just to give a little bit of context for the inquiry around how to get involved in Tibetan Buddhist practice and what's the landscape of practice in the US and in this tradition. So I wanted to start by just sort of giving Claire a little bit of an opportunity to share about her background and what Tibetan Buddhism has meant in her life, and how she came to be where she is now. We were introduced a few months ago from a long time, a temporary teacher and now friend of mine named Jogan Salzberg, who was a student at Great Vow Zen Monastery for a long time and is now a teacher, and lives in Asheville, and we were connected that way, and now looking forward to collaborating. So maybe you could share a little bit about your background.
Sure, yeah. It's nice to be here with you, Aaron, and hello to everybody who's watching later who has the same question. How do you start with Tibetan Buddhism? So I just want to situate myself, first of all, in kind of the Tibetan Buddhist landscape in North America. I'm a student of the amazing lamas Anne Klein and Harvey Aronson of Dawn Mountain, which is a Tibetan Buddhist temple located in Houston, Texas. Woo, H-Town. And both Anne and Harvey, they're lamas in the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism. And everything is happening online right now with Dawn Mountain. So you can Google them and find all the free and, paid or by donation offerings that they have. So basically, I got involved with Dawn Mountain way back. It seems like a previous lifetime now, 1997, when I was an undergrad at Rice, where Anne is a professor. And, so my path to getting involved with Tibetan Buddhism kind of came through the Thai forest tradition. I was coming off like a bad breakup with Christianity, you might say. So I was like not super interested in the Tibetan tradition to begin with, because if you're watching the video, you can see there's some Buddha images behind me. Like there's a lot more devotional aspect to Tibetan Buddhism than like the Thai tradition, where it's just like you sit, you meditate, you have all the teachings in support of the Buddha and the lineage, but like just get on your cushion and get it done. And in Tibetan Buddhism, it's much more about, receiving the blessings of lineage and having teachers, having a sangha. So I think the idea of like, how do you start, all of that is very important for authentic Tibetan practice. So for me, I kind of connected with Anne at Rice. I took a class by her and was just blown away by Buddhism. So, after I graduated, I spent some time meditating in Thailand. I had done a Tibetan study abroad program my last year at Rice. So later I went back and, did some more intensive practice in Asia on my own. But my path personally to getting involved with Tibetan Buddhism was very gradual. I started meditating, I became a Buddhist, I was like aware of it. I was really interested in Tibetan history. But it really took me like probably about 5 years of learning more, understanding more, and like really coming to trust my teachers before I started taking, initiations into doing certain practices like, the Buddha of compassion, well, multiple Buddhas of compassion. So in a way, like the traditional aspect of how I came to Tibetan Buddhism is that I had that initial connection with my teacher and was like amazed, dazzled. I was like, oh my God, I want to do this. This is awesome. I changed my major, etc. So there's like that initial burst of what Tibetans call depa, like you could translate it as faith. I like Anne's translation as sort of open-hearted confidence, like, oh my God, this is a tradition that can transform me. And then, it took years for me to work on the basics and to really begin to understand what I was even getting into when I started doing Vajrayana practice. And then, just to give you like a very brief overview, and we can dive deeper into this stuff with questions, like the basic way you enter into Tibetan Buddhist practice is, you begin by learning the basics of Buddhism, learning how to meditate, and then there's what's called the foundational practices, or ngondro, that comes before you do any, Vajrayana or tantric practice. Or in my tradition, those practices lead eventually to Dzogchen. Other lineages of Tibetan Buddhism have their own sort of peak practices, like Mahamudra or highest yoga tantra. So I'm only going to speak about the path that leads to Dzogchen because that's what I'm more familiar with. But there is kind of like it's almost like a, high school bachelor's degree, graduate degree kind of approach to how you train in the tradition. And I should just say also, I feel like I'm throwing out so much stuff here. So Aaron will, hopefully ask the questions that beginners might have. But my teachers, my lamas, are both lay people. So in my lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot of space for lay practice, meaning you don't have to become a monk or nun in order to really practice deeply. And, you're not like cut off from some aspect of lineage because you're not a monastic. So I feel like I've thrown out a lot. I want to pause and see what the questions are for you, Aaron.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing a bit of your story. I think so part of the reason I wanted to arrange this event and this discussion was that I don't really know how I would get involved with Tibetan Buddhism, and I've never had an encounter with a Tibetan Buddhist teacher where I've been like, oh, this is my way. But I also resonate a lot philosophically with certain aspects of the tradition as I understand it. And so I think I'm curious, like, what does it look like to be, you know, so in Zen, for example, there's monasteries and there's some city centers, there's Zen centers. You can go to the Zen centers and start meditating, and eventually you go do retreats at the monasteries. There's like a rough template for like physically how would one participate. And I found that as a little harder for me to grasp in the Tibetan Buddhist community, partially I think because it seems like there's many different lineages. They have very different ways of getting involved, and there's not a sort of as much of a template as I understand it for like, okay, there's this step where you need a teacher or you don't need a teacher, and this step where you go do retreats, or this step where you, so maybe you could just share a little bit about like if there's any commonality, if there's any sort of broad brushstrokes you could paint of like how does one become a practitioner, or what does a practice life look like, or is it essential to have a local physical community? Is it essential to have that kind of relationship with a teacher? I think all of these are things that highly structure how people participate in Buddhist practice in the U.S. So I know that was a bunch of things altogether, but I think that'll provide plenty of fodder for discussion.
Yeah. And I think part of what I hear in your question is like, there's just so many options. Like, how do you
Mhm.
even know? Which I think is really fair, because first of all, the different lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. And I also just want to say, the Ben tradition too, the sort of pre-Buddhist spiritual tradition of Tibet. It's, I think many of the things I'm going to say kind of hold true for that too. It's a wonderful tradition with a lot of wisdom in it. So for Tibetan Buddhism, definitely to progress into the higher stages of practice, you need to have a relationship with a teacher and a community. You kind of need that structure of trust, of like developing an actual personal relationship with someone who knows you. But you don't have to start there. There are a lot of urban Dharma centers and centers that do everything online or that share a lot of online material. Like, my home Sangha Don Mountain, they have so much stuff that's available online. And, that's just that kind of casual level, dropping in, doing some events, whether they're online or in person, getting a sense for that teacher, that community. It's really, really important to spend time doing that before you just like jump in the deep end. Because once you fall in love with a teacher, it's going to be way harder to see their shadow side. And I mean, 20 something years, oh my God, it's 25 years now, I guess, that I've been like practicing. And I feel super fortunate with like, the lamas that I happen to fall in love with. I think I just like had a karmic connection with them. But also they've been kind to me. They've had authenticity and integrity, and like, they're just people I trust, as humans, like not even as lamas, just as people, I trust them. And that's really important. Like the Dalai Lama has actually said, before you commit yourself to a teacher and you start receiving tantric empowerments from them, maybe watch them for like, I think he said 12 years. Most of us may
Yeah.
not feel like we have the time for that. I mean, it's the West and we don't know when we're going to die. And, there's all these reasons that time just feels short. But like, I think it's good to spend, if you have a year to get to know a community and do the basic practices, and maybe you're doing their online stuff. And, most Tibetan communities that I'm aware of, their teachers will do retreats somewhere in person. I mean, in the middle of COVID, nobody was doing that, but there's starting to be retreats again. Dawn Mountain does online retreats. So that's another option for, taking your practice to a deeper level. In the Tibetan tradition, there's sort of group retreats where you might do a practice together, or you might receive teachings together. So that's kind of one form of retreat. And then the other traditional form is to just go off by yourself and do solitary retreat. Certainly in my lineage, that one is powerful too. So like, I like to do a couple of weeks of solitary retreat in the summer and a week in the winter. And that just gives time for all of the teachings I've received during the year to kind of settle in, and I can review and stuff like that. But it's also very flexible. It gives you the time to schedule in, what's convenient for you. You don't have to spend a lot of money traveling to like, the other side of the continent or something. So that template of you start out, you go to some sittings, you get some teachings, and then maybe you go to retreat. I think that's good anywhere really in the Buddhist world that I'm familiar with. I mean, obviously these are more meditation focused lineages, or also chanting lineages, lineages where maybe pilgrimage or some other form of practice would be more important. So I'm kind of speaking about a certain form of Buddhism. But I think it's really good to spend, and actually important to spend that time doing those outer, being on the outer circle, checking it out, seeing if it feels good, seeing if your spidey sense tingles, in a good way or a bad way. And then, once you've spent maybe a couple of years, you might start to think about maybe taking refuge, which is how you become a Buddhist in any tradition. It's going to be a prerequisite to doing, the more advanced, I'll say deeper, maybe instead of like ascending a ladder, we're like diving down into the earth of our being. So before doing those deeper practices, part of receiving them is taking refuge, taking the bodhisattva vow, and then, receiving that tantric initiation. So it's a serious commitment. I mean, even just taking refuge, like you're committing to refrain from harming living beings as much as possible. You're committing to certain ethical standards. So, it's not something to jump into. But if you feel like you do want to take that next step, in a Tibetan Buddhist context, beginning the ngondro, the foundational practices in all the lineages that I'm aware of, that would be sort of the next step past, just maybe doing some retreats and seeing if you like this community, seeing if the teachers are a good fit for you. That was a long answer. I feel like I left a lot of stuff out, but
No,
you can.
that's really helpful. I think what I'm picking up is it maybe it feels a little challenging to me because it defies like the sort of model of there's a big old retreat center and you just go sign up and meditate a bunch for 10 days and you have your big experience and then you go home. And it's very hard to treat it like a there's almost a factory model
Yeah.
of retreats. And that is kind of the template for how I think a lot of people approach formal practice in the US at least. And so it seems like the Tibetan world resists that a little bit more than in Zen and Theravada. You can find that, and it's really taking the time to build a relationship with a specific place, specific teacher, specific community, and it is kind of the name of the game. It sounds like.
Yeah, I think I'm going to put my scholar hat on for a second here, but I think what you're saying, it's really valuable to be able to find a community, go do some practice, go to a retreat, have your experience, come home, integrate it. I think what's left out of that model, you know, if you think about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the Buddha is the teacher, the Dharma is the teachings, and the Sangha is the community. And out of the three, that one emphasizes Dharma.
Yeah.
And that's always important. But like with the Tibetan tradition in particular, the goal, how do I say this? Oh, I'll kind of paraphrase one of my favorite descriptions of one of my lamas who's from Tibet. He said basically the lama's job is like to be a like an aqueduct, to be like the portal through which blessings flow to the students. And the student's job is to receive the blessings. And I think for us as Westerners, for me anyway, I'll speak for myself, you know, we're coming from this individualistic culture where this is my mind, it's probably generated by my brain, and it lives like right here. There's like a spatial location. The idea that your mind could actually cause states of mind in me is, I mean, it sounds woo-woo. Now neuroscience is discovering mirror neurons. There's, you know, all these things that we're discovering that actually suggest that we function more like, you know, a network of brains rather than individual brains. But anyway, Tibetan Buddhism, I think, is maybe more so than Zen and Theravada. I'm not super qualified to say this, but it's the emphasis is very much on the teacher. And in the beginning, it's the external teacher, like having someone who actually knows you, who you interact with, who can like call you on your stuff when you're, you know, using Dharma in ways that are not helpful. And there's no substitute, but like an actual kind of ongoing relationship for that. And that person, their job is to kind of be the conduit for the blessings of the lineage. In the forms of Buddhism I've been exposed to, the idea that you could sit down, read a book about Dzogchen and have a Dzogchen experience is not, that's like an idea that's foreign to my experience of Buddhism so far. So what that really, you know, what it means is that you have to bring Buddha back in and you have to bring Sangha back in, to have that community of support, the people you're growing with, the people that annoy you, the people who support you, the people you love. And yeah, it's, you know, it's less comfortable, I think, for those of us who are maybe drawn to Buddhism, but we don't want to have to interact with humans. But ultimately, the transmission that happens in Tibetan Buddhism is not about words and texts. It's about states of mind. And the Lama's job is to embody that state of mind so that you can feel it. You don't think about it, you feel it, and you start being able to live into it because you've been directly introduced to it. And I think that is significantly different from, you know, like maybe a retreat center, like the Goenka style Vipassana retreat, where it's explicitly set up as secular. In this, I mean, it's not like you have to go around shouting, I'm Buddhist all day long or something, but like without that lineage, it's kind of hollow. a bit. So I know I've said a lot of stuff, some of which might rub people the wrong way. So I'll pause now.
I think it's a helpful um, note, though. It's a helpful map in a way to, it kind of calls us on some of the ways that we're bringing in, like there's some interesting kind of yeah, I think you can definitely engage with Buddhism and be a materialist and have a secular frame, and that tends to appeal and engender certain kinds of practice. And just noting like clearly where that's happening and what we're bringing into what spaces, like the kind of the notion that it's just number of hours of meditation sitting on the cushion, and that there's some kind of I'm enlightening myself happening as a result of that, is kind of is very, very compatible with like materialism and individualism and all these sort of culturally common things that we're carrying around. So it's kind of no surprise that that's like such a major force in the meditation world, is is that kind of retreat model.
Yeah. And it's not wrong. Like I don't want to come out like swinging against secular Buddhism or something. It's not wrong. It's just like, I don't know, if you're trying to understand a car and the way you understood it is you took everything apart and then you took like just the motor out, and then you became like a real expert in like how like valves work or something. Like
Mhm,
it's a really important part, but there's so much more on
mhm.
offer. I think not just in Tibetan Buddhism, but like in these other traditions as well.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to go there, I think it's great for people to get the benefit they get. It's just, I think for those of us practicing in these sort of traditional lineages, when somebody's like, yeah, Buddhism is all about meditation, you just kind of want to be like, okay, but there's the whole rest of the Dharma too.
Yeah, I think maybe even I should note that like in that's almost a caricature of Theravada and Zen. That's like it's a maybe a way that they've been popularized and like imported in the specific strands that have been picked up and promoted most widely here. But I know from my experience and from teachers I've worked with that there's a lot more to those those traditions too than they're usually uh, or that haven't fully come over and been culturally assimilated yet, is one way to think about it, where we usually get proxy to very specific slices of the tradition based on how it was brought over.
Yeah. And if you think about it, we're maybe 150 years into the transmission of Buddhism to like, European derived culture.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's nothing. It took China like 400 years to really integrate. So I think, at the same time that the West is having this huge impact on Buddhism, Buddhism is also having huge impact on us. And I think in 200 years, I hope, my aspiration is maybe Western culture will be there's going to be a new synthesis if there's humans left.
Mhm.
um and I think, I think these like metaphysical commitments to physicalism and, extreme individualism, I mean, they're quite exceptional in the history of humans. So I don't think they're likely to look this way still. And maybe the Dharma is part of what can help open that back up again. And you can see my metaphysical commitments coming through, but like, I think
Yeah.
we often, as is totally normal, we come at any new worldview bringing our entire unconscious worldview with us. So,
Mhm.
if you're hearing this and you're thinking like, wait, that's not what I want from Buddhism, I just want to go meditate. Yeah, that's fine too, but there's more.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so practically, maybe there'll be some people who watch this who won't come to the event or watch the recording of the event. So I'm curious if there's any resources that you would want to point people towards. I know you mentioned your teachers and Don Mountain, but If there's any other places or books, I don't know, anything that comes to mind in terms of like uh, foundational resources in Tibetan practice or community.
Yeah, I mean, there are books. Maybe we can have a list of some recommended readings and some links to, Dharma centers in the notes, or put
Yeah,
together like a document that we can share in the notes. The reason I always recommend my own teachers, like not just because I'm, partial to Don Mountain, but also because like I've known these people for 25
yeah,
years and I really trust them. Um, there's a lot of famous teachers out there. Like if you start looking into the world of Tibetan Buddhism, there's many great lamas, and everybody knows the Dalai Lama. You might know the Karmapa, Mingyur Rinpoche, Dzogchen Ponlop Rinpoche. Like there's all these like famous teachers. I think my advice would be to maybe if there's a center close to you, to check them out to see if you fit, to find someone who's not famous, and they're gonna, if you sign up for their stuff again and again, they're gonna get to know you. You're gonna have conversations, maybe have some individual sessions with them too, um, to establish that relationship. But yeah, there's wonderful teachers and all the different, there's sort of four major lineages of Tibetan Buddhism: the Gelug lineage, the Sakya lineage, the Kagyu lineage, and the Nyingma lineage. And in each of these, there's wonderful teachers. So I mean, there's just so many to list, so we can have that,
mhm,
separately. And it is great to start out, maybe just exploring with a book or watching somebody's YouTube's on or videos on YouTube, just to like, to have a sense of what fits you. Um, and then, if it's at all possible, maybe eventually someday go in person to a retreat that they offer. And most Dharma centers, if anyone is going to go out and search and find all this stuff that's like really expensive to sign up for, all the Dharma centers I know offer scholarships. They offer reduced rates, especially if things are online and there's not a like a cost to offering it. I would just say, like, please don't be deterred by like the sticker price. And you know, I think being willing to make the connection is the most important part of, starting to find your teacher. And I think sometimes people feel like you're gonna like be hit by lightning or something when you find your teacher. And um the most important thing is just to, like you would with any friendship or partnership or anything, to get to know them and build that trust, and establish an actual human relationship. And
That
don't
seems, yeah,
idealize the teacher, and like there's,
mhm.
let them come off the pedestal and be like a person so you can connect with them.
That seems to be the dominant thread here, is that there's this like relational piece that you're not going to escape. If you want to practice Tibetan Buddhism, you gotta show up and be in actual relationship with other people.
Yeah, I think with any spiritual path, when you start, often
Hmm.
it's fun, it's exciting, you're learning new stuff, having new experiences, but any deep spiritual path will change you. And the
Hmm.
process of being changed is sometimes painful. And I think it's always helpful to have someone who's at least walked a few steps further than you have, so that they can, support you through that process. I guess I didn't actually answer your question. I answered a different question. How do you create a relationship with a teacher? But yeah, there's a lot of different folks offering wonderful teachings. I offer some introductory things, so you're not going to get, necessarily advanced teachings, but whatever I offer, people are free to join and learn about things like impermanence, what is emptiness, what is Buddha nature, and just kind of get started so that you're ready to then, connect with a teacher when you find one.
Great. Sounds wonderful. Yeah, and thanks for sharing a bit of your uh, experience and life, and also uh, the degree of expertise you've cultivated through just being in this space, in this world for a little while is helpful to get a little bit more of a sense of the lay of things. So hopefully some other folks who watch this will find it helpful for them. And we also have an online event coming up, which will be a longer version of touching on some similar themes as this conversation, also with space for Q&A and some space for practice. So definitely invited to join us for that too.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say, you know, for anyone who starts exploring this world of Tibetan Buddhism, the most important guide is your own wisdom. So make sure you listen to your heart, do what feels good, and don't do what doesn't feel good. And I don't mean like in an ego way, but like your gut will tell you if you're in the wrong place, and you should definitely listen to that. You are your own Lama at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's important. Okay, I think we'll end the recording now.